Mercedes will face trouble in the next races, and the evidence is already starting to appear. Not on the scoreboard, not in the headlines, but deep inside the data, where patterns don't lie. Because what Mercedes did in Australia and China looks perfect on the surface. 2 races, 2 dominant performances, 0 failures. But Formula One has a pattern of its own. When something looks this perfect, this early, it usually doesn't stay that way, because perfection in Formula One is never stable. And that's exactly where the story begins to shift. At first, everyone focused on the obvious: race pace, strategy, driver performance. But engineers don't stop there. They go deeper. They break races into sectors, corners, acceleration zones, and that's where something unusual started to appear. Every car on the grid behaves in a predictable way. Out of a corner, maximum deployment. Halfway down the straight, slight reduction. End of the straight, clear drop-off. That's how the 2026 systems are designed. Energy is limited. Recovery is complex. Thermal limits are tight. You push too hard, you run out. That's the rule everyone is dealing with, except Mercedes. Because when you overlay their data, there is no drop, no fade, no visible limit. They keep accelerating, even when others have already peaked. And that's not just a small advantage. That's a completely different behavior model. Now here's where things become even more uncomfortable. Mercedes supplies engines to multiple teams, same hardware, same regulations, but completely different outcomes. Customer teams are struggling with electrical failures, battery inconsistencies, cooling issues, unstable deployment. Some are losing performance mid-race, others aren't even making it to the start. So how is one team running flawlessly, while others with the same engine are breaking down? That's not a coincidence. That's a gap in understanding. And in Formula One, understanding is everything. Then comes the human factor, because data tells you what is happening, but drivers tell you how it feels. And that's where Max Verstappen enters the picture. He didn't talk about lap times. He didn't talk about straight-line speed. He focused on something far more specific: energy behavior. He noticed that Mercedes doesn't deploy energy in bursts like everyone else. They don't spike, they don't fade, they sustain, deep into the straight, long after every other car has reached its limit. And that's the moment where engineers stop calling it performance and start calling it a pattern. Because patterns don't come from luck, they come from design. This is where an old concept returns, in a completely new form. Years ago, Formula One engines had something called party mode, a temporary boost, extreme power, short duration. It was dominant, and it was banned. But what if Mercedes didn't bring it back as a mode? What if they redesigned the entire system so that the boost is no longer a moment, but a constant state? Not a button, not a spike, but a continuous flow of optimized power. No sudden peaks, no obvious signals, just sustained advantage. If that's true, it changes everything, because you can't regulate what you can't clearly detect. To achieve that kind of performance, you need more than just a powerful engine. You need perfect synchronization. Energy harvesting must be efficient. Battery deployment must be precise. Thermal management must be stable. If temperatures rise by even a few degrees, performance drops. If recovery is slightly delayed, deployment suffers. If systems fall out of sync, the entire lap is compromised. Most teams are still balancing these factors. They push, and then they protect. They attack, and then they recover. But Mercedes, they don't seem to switch modes at all. They operate in one continuous optimized state, and that's what makes them so dangerous. Now the focus shifts deeper, beyond the battery, beyond deployment, into the heart of the power unit, the combustion engine. Because even with 50% electrical contribution, combustion still defines efficiency. And this is where the most sensitive theory is emerging. What if the engine behaves differently under real conditions? Not in the garage, not during inspection, but on track, at full temperature, at full pressure. Because engines are not static systems. They expand, materials shift, clearances change, tolerances evolve as heat builds. If Mercedes understands exactly how those changes happen, they can design an engine that meets every regulation when measured, but optimizes itself when racing. That's not breaking the rules. That's operating at the edge of them, and even a small gain, 10 to 15 horsepower, combined with improved efficiency, is enough to create a massive advantage, not just in speed, but in consistency. Because cleaner combustion means less heat, less stress, more stable energy systems. And that leads to something incredibly powerful: predictability. Mercedes isn't just fast, they are predictable. Every lap, every corner, every straight. And in Formula One, predictability wins championships. Now the pressure is building, quietly, but rapidly. Ferrari engineers are reanalyzing data. Red Bull is comparing traces. Honda and Audi are questioning assumptions. Because the fear is not just losing races. The fear is falling behind in a way that can't be recovered. And then comes the biggest factor of all, the FIA. Right now, everything Mercedes is doing appears legal. But there's a problem. Engines are tested under controlled conditions. Static environments, stable temperatures. But racing isn't static. It's dynamic, unstable, extreme. If Mercedes has optimized specifically for those real conditions, then they are operating in a space the rules don't fully cover yet. And that's where things can change very quickly. If the FIA decides to update testing methods to simulate real race conditions, this entire advantage could be questioned and possibly removed. Not because it's illegal, but because it's too effective. And Formula One has a history of closing gaps like that. That's why Mercedes may face trouble in the next races, not from performance, but from attention. Because once the spotlight shifts, everything gets examined. Every detail, every system, every assumption. And in Formula One, the moment everyone starts looking at you is the moment things start to change. So now we arrive at the real question. Did Mercedes simply out-engineer everyone? Or did they find something hidden inside the rules that no one else has discovered yet? Because if it's the first, this dominance could last all season. But if it's the second, then what we're seeing right now might not last much longer. And the next few races could change everything. Follow Race Gems for more F1 news and updates. Thank you for watching.